I want to begin by looking at what self-love is. And this definition then informs the behavior that is or is not self-loving. And I begin by thinking about the choice to do this video with my dog, Philip. In the camera setup, he'll mostly be out of view. But one of the things that I think is self-loving is the choice to put oneself in a context that brings out the qualities we like in one another, that brings out the best in one another. And so when I'm holding Philip, I'm more aware of my body rhythms. I feel a sense of pleasure. I feel higher elevations of oxytocin, and the more that I focus on Philip and his happiness as a general statistic, my own well-being can jump as much as 200%. And so, in that sense, holding Philip and really paying attention to him is in some ways more self-loving than making a video like this. And so making a video like this is I guess, more associated with, a longer-term vision. But that brings me to another criteria or definition of self-love, which is behavior that not only benefits the present, but benefits the future as well. And so I think that's an important, underpinning context to something like, an opiate or something which might boost, or a cocaine which might boost pleasure in the moment, or spending, anything that gives you that rush, that gives you a short-term high and a long-term withdrawal. So that which behaving in a way that brings out the best in one another. Another, I think, very important context is Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. That every human being in the history of humankind has had a need to survive, that the human ego has a need to survive, the need to feel secure and stable in that survival, the need to create a rapport of love and belonging, both with oneself and with other human beings. So an awareness of what is, and a harmonious relationship with what is. And that, particularly in a cultural context in which most of our survival is predicated on good relationships with other human beings, there's a need for love and belonging in order to increase our security of survival. And so, as with many hierarchies, the upper levels imply and strengthen the lower levels, like capstones on a wall that hold the rest of the stones more firmly in place. So love and belonging is critical. Self-esteem is also, I think, critical. Self-esteem, which I think in turn further strengthens love and belonging, because the love that we earn, the praise and the love and the validation that we earn from ourselves and give to ourselves, that sense of self-esteem, I like who I am, is part of teaching others to like us, because most other people tend to treat us as well as we treat ourselves. You'll have bullying behavior scattered around, and the bully kind of looks around and finds who gives, who accepts the bullying, and then that's their target. And then we all accept a certain amount of abuse as part of living in an imperfect environment, but to what extent? If you're in this community, do you accept, drinking contaminated water, being ignored by your politicians, this and that, the other? Whereas in another community, there's still abuse, but the water is clean. You get a courteous email, just nobody does anything that they say they will in the email, but you get a courteous email, and so there's various gradients of abuse. And so self-esteem and having a high regard for oneself in turn trains and reinforces the pattern of love and belonging. If we love and accept ourselves as we are, over time, other people do the same. And then we come to developing our potential, which of course strengthens self-esteem, the love that we earn. It also strengthens love and belonging. The more we develop, for example, when I learned to cook at age 13, learning to cook has meant that I have provided, I don't know, it's probably thousands of dishes of delicious food for other people. And, some people have really celebrated that food and just been totally into it, which then adds to the sense of self-esteem, the awareness that I like being someone that produces value for other human beings. So it's a pleasure to watch other people enjoy food, just as it's a pleasure to watch Philip's enjoyment of my company. If I touch him just the right way, he has a look where I know he's in absolute ecstasy, and there's a pleasure. The ability to provide or disseminate value is tied to our sense of beauty and goodness, and so links to the element of self-esteem, similarly deepening the security of love and belonging. Now, as we develop our own potential, the inward focus naturally leads to an outer focus, where we then share our strengths and our gifts with the rest of the world, which in turn creates various forms of wealth, various accesses to resources, whether it's delicious food in the case of cooking, or sharing ideas in the form of a book. This direction towards, the excellence within then becomes the fruit, bears fruit that spreads out virally as a pattern of value, a meme of value that ripples out in the community. And of course, it strengthens love and belonging. It strengthens security of survival, since the more love and belonging and loyalty there is for a given individual, the more likely that person is to survive and have access to all the various resources in their world. And then we move towards transcendence. We move towards, that chrysalis-like transformation from one type of organization into another, where it's like we gather the wood and we set the ring of stones, and we pile the wood with paper in the front and little bits of kindling, etc. And then we gather the flame and we light the fire. And there's a transcendent process where that which has been gathered is used in a fuel, is used to transform, to consume and transform that which was into a new shape. There's a heat generated, there's mineral and fertilizers generated in the ash, etc. There's a transformation. And And so we move into transcendence. And these are human needs. And so the question then becomes, am I self-loving? Can be viewed on that metric. Did this behavior increase my survival? If it's jeopardizing my survival, then there's a good case to be made that it's not very self-loving. If it's weakening the security of my survival, like I just racked up a bunch of credit card debt without any savings on tchotchkes that I'm not really going to do anything. They're just going to be in fashion for a little bit, and then they'll go out of fashion, and I'll have the credit card debt, and then I'll have to buy some new fashionable items. Is my security, is the security of my survival enhanced by that? Or is it more of an addictive coping mechanism or compensating mechanism for believing that I'm not valuable, and so I need to keep, buying things to tell me that I'm worth it? Because this also is, an expression of self-love, versus, for example, planting a crop, planting a garden, in a context where that garden will yield nourishment, that it will sustain the health of my body in the coming year. So you have things that deteriorate our survival and our security and survival, and things that enhance that. Did I do my yoga today? Again, whatever the question, does it facilitate my migration towards the meeting of these universal human needs, or does it distract from them? And so this is a sense of self-love. And final, another overlay that can be a little bit of a shortcut is, am I treating myself the way that I would aspire to treat my best friend? So if someone is bullying my best friend, what do I do? What do I want to do? What do I want to have happen? Well, if someone's bullying me, am I responding in a similar way? Or am I treating my best friend, better than myself in this? If my best friend has a problem, do I ignore the problem until it's too late? Or do I say, hey, we really need to focus on a solution to this problem? And so these are three kind of shortcuts, three layers of filtering that I suggest as the overlay for self-love. Again, am I putting myself in contexts and in situations that bring out the best in me? What I mean by that is, we all have a probability field. If I rape your daughter, steal your money, step on your toe 500 times, and then insult you in public, there is a you that gets predisposed by that experience. And it's generally speaking, statistically speaking, not a great you. You're not going to be overflowing with gratitude and centered and etc. You're going to be in shock, you're going to be in trauma. And the you that we're going to see is the you in shock and trauma. We're not going to see the transcendent Buddhist monk, in that moment. We might see that if your bank account is comfortable, you're off at a Buddhist retreat, having paid your thousands of dollars, eating your delicious organic food carefully prepared by your chef. We're going to see a different side of you in that environment of safety and comfort and self-love than, in an environment of, torture and horror and etc. And so, if you're moving your family, are you moving them to an area that's much more likely to be raped, much more likely to be stolen from, or much more likely to be safe, etc.? And so these choices about the context that we put ourselves in. Am I putting myself in a context that brings out the best in me? And I think that's one filter. Am I behaving in a way that is allowing me to ascend my hierarchy of needs, both short and long term? And am I treating myself the way that I would wish a best friend to be treated? And am I living the way that I would respect and admire? Like when you want the best for someone, you don't want them to lie to themselves. You don't want them to take shortcuts and then pretend it was no big deal and stuff like that. It's not, you don't want that. So you want something else. And so what is that that you want? And are you taking that path? Which, for example, may include paths of discipline, etc. Now, the underlying belief and intention in self-love, the equation, is the efficiency of transforming energy into human well-being. And so, for example, if you bought a new Mercedes on credit card debt and created a 30% boost, which usually rapidly fades because then you're worrying about the credit card debt and stuff. But if you create that rapid boost, might you not get a sustained 30% improvement by doing yoga and not spending a penny and being more focused for the rest of the day? Well, if that is the case, and this is, the feedback loop is essential, then doing yoga is a more intelligent behavior because it is a more efficient path of turning time, money, and natural resources into human well-being. And so that's the overlying context. Now, within this framework, as I look at my life in the context of self-love, we come back to Philip. Philip is, my dog, is one of the most intelligent investments of money, natural resources, and energy and attention in my life in terms of the amount of well-being generated. And so it becomes an act of self-love. In many cases, as I walk around, it seems as if Philip is more popular than I am. But as with being around any popular person, Philip facilitates the needs, the direction towards love and belonging. I'll have more social interactions in the United States as a result of Philip than, for example, a video like this. And that's just the culture. And so, which brings into, awareness that there have been 10,000 cultures in human history, and different cultures have different results. Different things make sense in one culture versus another. It depends on the culture. And so, there's a sense of a very self-loving choice. Respecting dignity and telling the truth. I learned how much it hurt when my mother lied to me or my father disappointed me. I lost respect because there was often, it was disappointing to think that was the best that could be done, particularly when it wasn't acknowledged, when there's a lying and then there's a lie about the lie, like, no, this didn't really happen, or let's forget about this. And it struck me as being off, as, hurtful. And so I've always told the truth, being as candid and transparent as I can. And that's an act of love. It has increased my trustworthiness, which has increased my survival and security. In business, I found that clients, often pick up on that and trust that, and rightfully so. And so there's an increase in survival, but also it's like becoming the best me. Is this helping to bring out the best me? And I think that telling the truth does. It takes an enormous amount of energy to live a lie and to lie. Withdrawing from the family system, my family system as a child brought out many of my worst traits. Like many family systems, they need scapegoats for the buried emotions that the parents aren't willing to deal with. They need distractions for the anxieties and fears the parent doesn't want to feel. They need problems to come up in the child to keep the marriage together, and all these different things where they need that from the child, but it's actually not bringing out the best in the child. It's not bringing out, it's not leading the child in a good direction. It's just maintaining, a very dysfunctional family system. So withdrawing from that, doing meditation to love my inner child and love my adolescent as an adolescent, doing, regular weekly meditations about that, a profoundly self-loving transformation occurring, in that framework, in that work. Writing and honoring feelings, digesting energy, refining it, making it more conscious in writing, in poetry, etc. A magnificent act of self-love and self-respect. Forming goals, the process of setting my sights on things, and this was particularly transformative earlier on. I've gotten a little lost in my current state where very few of my goals have anything to do with survival and security. They're mostly about service dynamics and challenging, growth in our culture and stuff. So they don't necessarily lead to love and belonging because most dysfunctional systems, be they a family system or a governmental system, are very attached to their status quo, independent of their intelligence and independent of the intelligence of the status quo. And so, one is not necessarily appreciated for trying to do something more intelligent in a family system and government and stuff. And so, having achieved thousands of goals, it's not entirely clear what is and is not the most loving in this context. But certainly, the various goals in my teenage years and 20s and early 30s, an enormous, acceleration of growth. The choice to focus on growing value as a company owner. I want to provide more value for my clients, which translates into income, which translates into survival and security. And also some sense of love and belonging, being able to have a rapport with clients. Creating a healing and safe home, going back to that sense of being at my best. I was very aware that I was not at my best in many contexts. And what's interesting is people judge and assess you based on the value you deliver in the context in which you are in. Very few people have the imagination and initiative to say, oh my God, you're wasted in a Starbucks having a 20-minute chit-chat. We need to have a deep philosophical conversation in the mountain. So let's delete the 20-minute Starbucks chit-chat and all the noise and stuff, and let's travel to a mountain. And then there, we'll have one of the most profound conversations of my life, and you will be one of the most valuable people, uninterrupted, no cell phones, no stress, time to dive down deeply into truth, and wow, your attention span, your attention to detail. I want to experience you at your best. No one in the entire history of my life has ever had the intelligence and self-love to suggest that. Rather, what I observed was that people make assumptions about based on the behavior you're exhibiting in a given situation. And if they don't experience a lot of value in that situation, they don't want to have more interaction. And so one of the things that, this was frustrating, because what would happen was I would see myself in certain contexts with certain people who allowed that context. And I would get extraordinary feedback. Wow, this is the most rich this or that I've ever experienced. This is amazing. I love this. And then I'd have different interactions in completely different, more mundane contexts that were people they didn't even want to get to know me. And because, of course, they didn't have a profound experience in a mediocre environment. And so one of the things, around creating a healing and safe home was to have first interactions with people in an environment that brought out the best in me, which, everything about my home does in many ways. And so, you don't see me having an allergy attack in my home. You see the delicious delight of, a home organic vegetarian cooked meal that with a recipe that I've invented. And that's, being in a fast food restaurant, I'm a problem customer. Being a chef in my home, I'm an amazing, effervescent, etc., etc. And the difference is not me. The difference is context. And so it's an act of self-love to create context. Learning, of course, about success. Studying, biographies of hundreds of unique artists and individuals throughout history, and learning the different algorithms, the thoughts and feelings and things that brought them in that direction. Picking an older partner for my first relationship, someone who knew what they were doing, picking someone who had excellent communication skills as opposed to, something else. Thinking win-win. Whenever you think win-win, if you're smart, you can easily set little traps where people who don't think beyond the horizon can get caught in your trap. You can set up something. It's like, okay, I want you to agree to this because you know what's beyond the horizon, but they don't, because some people think further ahead than others. And so you can set up a trap where once they get there, they have to do what they said, but they wouldn't have chosen that freely if they had known. And so, that's a win-lose dynamic where you get short-term gains and destroy relationships. Picking and thinking win-win, where you want, when the client is writing the last check at the end of the job, you want them to be happier than they felt at the beginning with, the uncertainty of it all and not really knowing. And how do you structure something so that occurs? Thinking win-win is a profound act of self-love, because it's hard not to think of oneself as a schmuck if one knows that one is entering relationships that other people will regret at the end. I mean, I'm not sure how else you can do that. If you're doing the same thing you've always done, which leaves 90% of people unhappy, you have to say that if you didn't enter that relationship, that person might be better off. Well, that's that's not a fun thing, success. Cultivating the parts that I love, I think, are a really important thing. And within that context, going to Thailand brings out a part of me that I love, that I don't get to experience much in the United States. And so going there is an act of cultivation. It's much like taking an orchid. It's like, I love this orchid. It dies here, but I love this orchid. Well, where could I take this orchid where it would flourish? And of course, different personas, different inner personas need different environmental climates. Different inner personas need different cultural ambiances to flourish, and will be killed off in others, much like that orchid taken to Alaska, it's dead in 24 hours. You take the orchid to Thailand, it's blossoming a year later and having babies. It's very important to understand what inside of all the different possibilities to grow within do we want to grow in? Where can we grow to bring out the best in that? Learning from mistakes, of course, ties in, of course, ties in with thinking and feeling. I think that's, in writing diaries and stuff. And, there's a whole host of different things that I've done, in my life, many of which I outline in the book, 101 Choices on my path to well-being and the thoughts that made those choices possible. But the bottom line is, which questions do we ask ourselves? Which questions do we cross-reference when answering the question, what can I do to be more self-loving? Take care.